Welcome. I'm Bill Lord, and this is the 2020-2021 Board of Directors candidate interviews. We're going to meet with a couple of candidates this afternoon with a series of 11 questions. So first, I just want to say I hope this finds everyone safe and healthy, and that extends to you, Terry. I hope everything is well in your neck of the woods.
Thank you.
So Terry Vickery is our first candidate, and let's just dive right in. What is it that makes you want to be a board member here at Lake of the Woods?
So I think, like many candidates would normally say, I want to give back to my community. But I think in addition to that, or more than that, I feel that I have the background, the skill set, and the right personality for this job at this time, especially with the COVID-19 going on and how things are going to have to be managed probably a little bit differently in the next couple of years. I also feel that given my international experience, I've learned to work with a diverse group of people, which means that I know how to listen and I know how to try and find compromise. I think I've been actively involved here since my husband and I moved here 3 years ago. And I hope that I can help to improve and preserve what we have in this community.
You said international experience. I'm just curious. Briefly, could you tell me what you were referring to?
Yeah, so I'm the daughter of a government employee, so I was born in Japan. I lived in Thailand and Brazil also with my family. And then when I graduated from college, I got a job in international banking.
Sure.
And I either lived in New York City and traveled around the world to audit different aspects of our banks, or I lived in Brazil 5 different times for a total of 14 years, lived in Hong Kong for 3 years. I lived in Paris for 2 years.
So I think this really ties right into our second question. What qualifications do you bring to the association?
Good. So about 35 years of work. All of my work was in credit risk management, 25 years in international banking, and 10 years at the Department of Agriculture, helping them to manage a $5 billion export credit guarantee program. So that means my background includes financial analysis, business plans, cash flow analysis. I'm familiar with all of those things. In addition, because I lived overseas, I had to work with lots of different groups of people, and that meant that I had to help figure out how to get to compromise, even though people were coming from totally different places. Since moving here, I've been on 3 committees. I'm the chair of the fitness committee. I've been on that committee for 3 years. I was the vice chair the second year, and this year I'm the chair. I've been on the planning committee for 2 years. And I was on the nominating committee until I had to resign because I decided to do this.
Okay. So you 3 years, and you've really dug into the community, and that's fantastic to see. But what would you think are the 3 most important duties of the board of directors?
So in no particular order, I think 1 is prudent financial management. That means coming up with a business plan, having a 5-year plan. And then once you have that plan, monitoring it so that you're sticking with it as best as possible. The second is to be a representative of all members of the community. That means being available to people, listening to them and truly listening, not just kind of getting ready to give your answer, but to truly listen, to try and take in all of that information and help to implement what you deem is best for the community. And then the third would probably be governance, which is making sure that we have strong policies that are relevant to our community and that we help to establish those policies, implement, maintain those policies, and then when we realize that it's necessary, change the policies.
Okay. I've been doing these questions for a couple of years now, and this is the one that always the answers interest me the most. Where do you feel the role of the board member ends and the role of the general manager and his staff begins?
Hmm. Well, without getting into politics, maybe it's a little bit like the role of the president of the United States and then his different officers. And so the board is the entity that sets the goals, sets the policy, establishes and approves the budget. The general manager and all of his staff are the people who have been authorized to implement those goals, policies, and budget. So the general manager and his team do the day-to-day work while the board is doing the general oversight and making sure that everyone understands what the goals are. The general manager and his staff serve at the discretion of the board.
Okay. All right. Very good. What is your understanding of our reserve study and how LOA uses it?
Okay, so there's a report called the Miller-Dodson Report. It's a 5-year rolling report. It looks at every single asset here at the lake. And it's not just the clubhouse. It will be the roof of the clubhouse, the walls of the clubhouse, every single item. And it tries to estimate what the life of each component is, and therefore when they would need to be repaired or replaced. That is submitted to LOA and that reviewed by the planning committee, the finance committee, general manager and his staff, as well as the board. And then what they do is try and figure out, based on that report, what items are going to probably need to be repaired or replaced in the next 5 years. And then they also try and look at the fact that you've got kind of peaks and valleys when you look at a report like that, and you want to try and even it out so that you don't have a particular year where you're spending a lot more than other years. But you also have to keep in mind that these are items that do eventually need to be repaired or replaced. So it's a little bit like the roof on your house. You can only put it off for so long, and then your roof is leaking, and then you've got to do it. So that's the Miller-Dodson report really focuses on the repair and replacement, and that we have a reserve for that. The other thing is new assets and improvements. And those are capital projects, things that we don't have today and we want to establish, or that we have and need to be significantly improved. And there's another reserve for that and another way to get those approved.
All right, very good. So can you explain your understanding of how the LOA operating budget is developed?
Okay. So having been on the planning committee for 2 years, I've actually sat in on the 2.5-day meetings that they have in December. Those are meetings between that they're led by the finance committee. The planning committee is also there. The board attends, but they are really just observing and listening. And then all the general manager and all of his staff are also there. So they're presenting the operating budget. And the operating budget is the main component of our annual budget. And what it does is it looks at the day-to-day management of Lake of the Woods. So it's expenses like personnel, utilities, insurance, and just general maintenance. And so every operating center, let's say the fitness center, the clubhouse, the equestrian center, each one of those has its own operating budget. And they submit every year what their proposed budget is, revenues and expenses. And that's what's reviewed and discussed at this 2.5-day meeting. And so that's probably one of the biggest components of the budget. Then the other, again, like I said before, the other big components are the reserve, repair and replacement reserve, and the new asset and improvement reserve. And those are also the items that are in there that are of significant dollar value are also discussed at that meeting. Then the board takes in all of that information and they approve a budget in February. And that's how everybody's assessment is determined. You take all that, you add it up, you divide it by the number of houses here, and that's what your assessment is.
All right. What, since let's stay on the topic of budget for a second. What suggestions do you have for the administration to work within the budget?
Well, so as I said, I am on the planning committee now. And so what I will say is probably something that most of us in the planning committee feel pretty strongly about. There is a form called the New Asset and Improvement Form. It is what is supposed to be submitted to the planning committee and the finance committee when they want a new asset. And an example of that would be to create a new walking path from point A to point B, or to purchase or to build something annexed to like Fairways Cafe. Those types of things. But what can often happen is that the form is not really completed very thoroughly. And that means that everybody, planning, finance, the board, they all have to kind of do a lot of guesswork. So what the planning committee is trying to do is to develop a form that is very clear, very succinct, and assists the people who have to complete it to fill out a thorough form that is informative. And we'd also like to suggest that if that form is not fully and properly completed, that the project not be accepted. In other words, it shouldn't be allowed to get past planning and finance if it's not a good presentation or a thorough presentation. And then I think the other thing would be inflation. I know that a lot of people have talked about this, that we should probably be looking at how to incorporate an inflation factor into our budget, into the Miller-Dodson report for items probably beyond the first 2 years. Because once you're talking year 3 and beyond, you know that if I say that something's going to cost $10,000 today, in year 3, it doesn't cost $10,000. It costs, at least the inflation rate beyond that. And then prioritize. There are a lot of things out there, and I know this is what the board and the general manager try really hard to do, but it's prioritizing which projects, which repairs and replacements we want to do. And that's going to be even harder in the next couple of years because with COVID-19, everything being shut down for so long, we have essentially lost a lot of income. If we lost a lot of income, it means we have to make decisions about what projects we will and won't fund in the next couple of years.
All right, let's expand on that a little bit more. COVID-19 caught the world off guard, pretty much. But now that we're living through this, what would you like LOA to do so that the community might become better prepared for another pandemic that could come along?
Yeah, it's a good question. So sadly, because we have lived through this or are living through it, we probably have some lessons learned. So I think we should be looking at what did we do well and what could we have done better? And then with that, put together an emergency preparedness plan. So every operating center should have a plan. And all of LOA then has a total one that looks at, if these things happen, what are the steps that we take? And focus should be on safety of all of our members, all of our employees, as well as the financial impact that something like this can have. And then document it, so that when something happens, we all know where to go to grab the plan and try to start implementing it.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions that might help reduce the balloting period in future referendums?
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, and just get people to vote in a more timely manner. It's, these seem to go on forever and ever.
So I think that we've probably said this a million times, but I think it needs to be said again. Not voting does not mean that you have voted no. And a lot of people think that by not voting, by abstaining, that means that they voted no, and that's not the case. And so it's educating or continuing to try to educate people on that. Another thing is, I know that initially it was everything was paper vote, then they moved it to allow electronic voting, and my understanding is that the board is now considering voting by telephone. I would certainly support allowing voting by telephone, especially if we can determine that it can be done in a way that each person's telephone vote is properly recorded and recognized, because you certainly don't want to create an opportunity for fraud. And then I guess the other thing is, as humans, we tend to operate on rewards and penalties. Can't really think of any appropriate penalties for people not voting. This is a democracy, but maybe there are rewards. And I know that we've tried that with gift certificates. And I honestly don't know if that had a positive influence or not, but I would take a look at that, see if it did have any impact, and see what else we could do that way.
Okay. So, in this world of social media, as a board member, you're going to be scrutinized by members of the community, not only during meetings, but also on social media and just elsewhere. How do you feel about that, and how will you handle that?
Well,
because people aren't always nice.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll admit I'm human. And so that's going to be a challenge. And I know I'm going to have to develop a thick skin. I also know I'm going to be relying a lot on my husband to tell me that I have to have a thick skin. But what I try and remind myself is that I have been in leadership roles for many, many years. And in those roles, I had to make tough decisions. And I know that when you do that, you're not always popular and that people are going to criticize you. It's human nature to kind of say, if you didn't listen to what I suggested, then you're not listening to me, or you're not voting right. And that's a director can only do what he or she thinks is proper based on what he or she thinks the majority of people want and what's best for the community. So I have to accept that criticism is a natural part of the process, and that I just have to have a thick skin for it. But I do believe that if one is straightforward and honest and open in one's communication, that really helps a lot. What people need to believe is that they've been listened to.
Very good. Very good. So how do you view your responsibility as an incoming board member to carry out the decisions that were made before your tenure, whether you agree with them or disagree?
Well, I guess, again, I kind of think about my professional career. When I had a job, whatever it was, it started with I had to implement and follow all the rules that had been established before me. So it's the same type of thing. Previous boards have established policies, regulations, bylaws, and it is the role of this board to ensure the proper implementation and enforcement of those. Up to the day that, if the board determines that regulation or bylaw is really no longer relevant and needs to be amended or changed, and then that's another process. The other thing that I always have to keep in mind is that there are 7 board members, so it's going to be, I'm sure, quite often that the board is going to vote in a way that maybe I don't agree with, and that's fine. At least I've had my opportunity to speak my mind. And once I have, even if the decision is not what I wanted, I support whatever the board has decided.
Very good. Very good. Well, there's only 35 more questions.
Good.
No, we've actually gone through the entire list, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to answer the questions and let everybody get to know you a little bit.
Well, thank you very much. I
Well,
enjoyed it.
all right. Well, stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you around the neighborhood.
You got it.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Bill Lord, and I welcome you to the 2020-2021 Board of Directors candidate interviews. We have 11 questions, and with us right now is Carl Clausen, who is currently a board member and is running for re-election. Welcome, Carl.
Hello, how are you doing?
Doing very
Thank you.
well. Very well. So you've heard a lot of these questions before, but there are a couple of different ones. But just to refresh in the minds of the residents, let's go through these and start with, why is it that you want to be a board member here at Lake of the Woods, or continue to be a board member?
Well, I wish to continue to serve on the board of directors to continue help with the coordination between the members, committees, and management.
Okay. And can you discuss your qualifications that you bring to the association?
Well, I served as a volunteer for 3 years on 3 committees for 3 years, and the Environmental Control Committee, the Equestrian Committee, and the Maintenance Committee. I served with Lowell Board of Directors for a 1-year term and currently serving on the Lowell Board for a 3-year term. I've learned a lot about how our community operates and its needs. I know that I would not have wanted to serve on the Board of Directors without the firsthand experience.
Okay. What, in your experience, what have you thought of as the 3 most important duties of the Board of Directors?
Well, to serve the community as an elected official, having 1 vote on the board of 7 to represent the wants and needs of our community. Number 2, to serve as board liaison for various committees as selected at the annual meeting. This includes attending the meetings and that they're voting at the time and date.
Okay. Can you explain to us your understanding of the role of, where the role of the board member ends and the role of the general manager and his staff begins?
Well, normally the board of directors ask questions of management, and I do ask questions of management from time to time, but I never suggest on what they should do. I always go to the general manager and talk to him, or to the president, residing president at the time, and talk to them about the message I'd like to get across to management. But it's always carried forward by the president of the board to the general manager.
Okay. And could you explain your understanding of our reserve study and how LOA uses it?
Well, that's kind of a complicated question there, because it deals with the working with the management to keep the reserve replenishment updated for the 2021. And it comes from the Miller Dodson Associates, and it's updated from time to time depending on the needs that we have and some emergency things that comes up. But most of the time we try to stay within the budget of that year, and we have over 770 different items in that budget over a 30-year term, but we try to work with a 5-year window. So that's how we work with the selecting on how we spend our money in the lake.
Okay. And can you discuss your understanding of how the LOA operating budget is developed?
Well, the lower operating budget is developed. We have committees. One of them is a planning committee, and the other one's a finance committee, and we usually go to them for advice, and they give advice to the board and to management. Management reviews some of those items that went to them, and then they bring forward at the board meetings to the board. And what we do is we discuss them, we vote them, we have a second. If we can get a second, sometimes we don't get a second, so we don't get to discuss it. But when we do get the second, we discuss it, we talk about the pros and cons of what that's going to be, and then the board will vote on it, and it will become what we do and how we operate.
Okay. What suggestions do you have for the administration to work within the budget?
Well, we have a budget. We try to stay within the fiscal year of what we're supposed to be doing according to the Miller Dodson report. And as far as sometimes I believe that we're over budgeting sometimes, and when we come under the budget, it makes us all look great. But I kind of like to keep everything down to a tight knit. What is exactly going to cost, and if it comes within maybe 6 to 8% of what it was, I'm happy with that.
Okay. Let's talk about COVID-19 for a second.
It's
What?
a bad subject.
Yeah, well, it's hasn't been much fun for anybody, has it?
No, it has not.
What suggestions do you have, if any, that might or that the community could use to be better prepared for another pandemic that may come along?
Well, at this time, as most people know, we're kind of governed by what the governor of the state says what we have to do. So we try to follow his guidelines, and we try to relate his guidelines to our community, which is a lot different from some cities and small towns. We are pretty unique within ourselves, but keeping up with social distancing and the mask wearing and not touching each other, it's all that stuff. We're going to have to repeat it. Plus, when this is all said and done, we're going to look back at what we did and better ways that we could have done things like that. So we can, if we do, heaven forbid, run into another pandemic, we're a little bit more prepared by the history of what we went through now.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions that might help reduce the balloting period in future referendums? How can we get members to vote in a more timely way?
Well, we went to the electronic voting now, Vote Now platform. A lot of people, I think, like myself, we're a little old and we just can't quite grasp how to run that computer. If you even have a computer or a cell phone, or some people just don't have that, so they don't really know how to vote. I would like to see us put the ballot box back down at the Holcomb building. And when you come in to pay a bill or what have you, and if there's a referendum or any kind of vote going on, have the employees give you a ballot at that time, fill it out and put it in the box. Now, once it's in the box, it becomes an issue of who picks it up and who counts it. There's usually one person in charge of it, and that's usually the election committee chair. And this person takes that key and unlocks the box. And I think if we did something like had a couple of other people there and they counted the votes, or they send it off to Vote Now, and Vote Now takes the vote and they register how the people voted in the box, I believe we could get more people to respond on a written ballot, because telephone voting and computer voting is complicated for some people.
Okay. So as you are very well aware, as a board member, you are constantly scrutinized by members of the community during meetings on social media and who knows where else. How do you feel about that, and how do you handle that?
Well, all of the board members have a board address, and you can also contact everybody by typing in board.org. And if you've got a complaint, register it there. And that way, all 7 board members get to look at that. And we all have an opinion, and we can talk about that and discuss it. And we're always ready to help. Many times somebody has contacted me, and I'll go to their house to look at their problem to see if I can help them physically and bring it back to the board and talk to the board about what we can do to help the membership in here, because we have a lot of rules. And the problem is, a lot of people, when they buy into this place, they're worried about their mortgage, they're worried about getting a loan through, and they're worried about everything, and they just don't read the rules. But when they do come in and they try to do something like paint their door a different color, all of a sudden, hey, the rule pops up. And they begin to start looking at these rules. And that really, once you look at the rules, you'll understand more how this place operates. And believe me, most of those rules were written for a reason. I'd like to see some of them gone away, but that's going to take some time and effort, because some of them are outdated, and we just need to correct some of them and make them more sensible.
Okay. So how do you view your responsibility as a returning board member, or, you know, hopefully,
Yep,
right,
we'll see.
to carry out the decisions that were made by the previous board?
Well, me being on the previous boards for 2 terms, some of those decisions were made by me. Once again, I'm only one of 7 people that determine, and it takes 4 to make the quorum, to make the, whatever the motion may be, passed. And at this point, we just do the best we can with what's passed on to us and try to look to the future and learn from our mistakes in the past and try to make things a lot better.
All right, very good. Well, Carl Clausen, thank you very much for taking some time out to get to know let the members get to know you a little bit better, for those who don't already. And thanks for taking the time to answer the questions. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Enjoy your day. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe.
I will.
All right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.